Good morning. Well, we'll go ahead and get things started here. We're at the top of the hour. It's 9 o'clock. I'd like to thank you all for coming out this morning. Now, this is the critical infrastructure conversation, so I think you may be in the wrong room. We're going to be talking about critical infrastructure records. You're seriously interested in this? All right. I'm only here because Doug asked me to. Otherwise, I wouldn't be hanging around for this. My name is Dan Hodges. I do government affairs for Colorado Springs Utilities. And in that capacity, I do the state and federal interactions for the entire utility operation. And I just want to quickly turn things over to Bill and let him introduce himself.
Sure. I'm Bill McCormick. I'm the chief of Colorado Dam Safety. And I think Dan's going to talk a little bit this morning about Senate Bill 1740, and I'll chat about our Colorado dam safety experience. We have been dealing with critical infrastructure information for a while, and so I'll just share what we do and what we see maybe in the future there, and how it interacts with Senate Bill 1740 as well. So.
All right, well, excellent. Well, thanks again for being here. And seriously, if this is putting you to sleep and you need to duck out, I won't take it personally at all. And forgive me, I'm going to have to stand up. This is a 4 a.m. departure out of the Springs this morning to come talk to you lovely people. So I'm a little loopy right now, feeling the effects of that early rise. So if I'm stumbling or if I'm looking a little spacey, I apologize in advance. So the reason I'm here, the reason we're having this conversation today, is because of Section 215 of the Federal Power Act. And you're looking at me and saying, well, Dan, this is Water Congress. Why are you here talking to me about the Federal Power Act? What's that have to do with anything? Well, a lot of our friends in the water world don't recognize that Colorado Springs Utilities is a pretty significant electric utility. As conversely, a lot of my friends in the electric world don't recognize this as a pretty significant water utility. Colorado Springs Utilities is a Forest Service utility. We provide water, wastewater, gas, and electric service to a community of just over 500,000 people. In our capacity as an electric utility, we're vertically integrated, which means we own the generation, transmission, and distribution system, which makes us rather unique in terms of cities, especially cities in Colorado that have that capacity. In fact, we're the only city in Colorado with that sort of vertically integrated capacity. As such, we're just under a gigawatt, 900 some megawatts of peak demand in Colorado Springs Utilities. We have installed capacity right around that amount. Our resource distribution is about 60% natural gas, about 30% coal, and then about a 10% mix of renewable energy, with that 10% mix growing every year. As such, we touch what's called the bulk electric system. Show of hands, how many of you guys have heard the word the grid? The grid. All right, we've all heard about the grid. There really is no the grid in terms of one coast-to-coast network of electric transmission that connects the entire country. There's actually 3 grids in the United States. In the eastern half of the country, you have the Eastern Interconnect. In Texas, they're their own little country down there. You have ERCOT. And then on the western part of the United States, you have the Western Interconnect. And that basically stems from Colorado out to California, all the way up into Canada, British Columbia, down to just some very northern parts of Mexico. So the Western Interconnect is a large footprint. Colorado Springs Utilities as a utility is tied into that network. What does that mean? Well, that means we both transmit and sort of receive electricity from that network. We're all sort of connected as electric generators on that grid, which means if something goes down in, say, Montana, it could have sort of a cascading effect all the way down to the city of Colorado Springs, in that there's not sufficient power on the entire system at one particular point in time. Somebody has to come online and make that power up, and it could cause a demand on resources, which is a long way of saying you could have either a blackout or a brownout situation in those instances. Electricity, for those of you who are not aware, is an on-demand resource. In other words, when you flip on a light switch, the power needs to be there. It isn't stored in a battery somewhere. They are working on those technologies, but there is no such thing right now as commercially viable large-scale storage. As such, you need to have electrical generators ready to go on a moment's notice to provide power on that grid when that power is demanded. Conversely, you have to be able to bring those generators offline when the demand for that power goes away. Otherwise, your system gets in a lot of imbalance and you run into a lot of trouble. It's really rather amazing to think about it, but the entire West is sort of like one big machine with everybody interconnected. So with that as sort of our context, why on earth are we talking about critical infrastructure protection? Well, Section 215 of the Federal Power Act was passed by Congress in 2005, and Congress directed the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to oversee the reliability of the bulk electric system. In other words, Congress recognized that these systems are interconnected. It's a matter of interstate commerce. Frankly, it's a matter of national security that these systems, these three systems on the grid, be able to operate in their interconnected manner, and somebody needs to guarantee that these systems are reliable. So an event, for example, in Colorado Springs could have effects somewhere else down the line. So the federal government, through the FERC, has regulation over this reliability. Within that piece of reliability is this thing on critical infrastructure protection. And we have what's called the North American Electric Reliability Council, which is an industry-driven sort of private-public partnership where industry gets together and we set standards for what it means to be reliable. And that's overseen with sort of the full force and effect of the FERC. NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Council, has a series of checklists that they go through to say, what is it that makes you a reliable utility and what is it that makes you unreliable? Within that checklist, they have the ability to come in and fine a utility, and I'm talking fines of over $1 million for noncompliance. We take our NERC audits very seriously. And this comes things like, are your system operators well trained? Is your plant and equipment up to snuff? Are you doing your maintenance? And above all, is your site secure? Both from a cyber perspective to a physical perspective. It goes down to things like who can access what floors at your department. Your NERC security standards are something that are very serious. We take them as serious as a heart attack because of the importance not only to our community, but to our obligations to the wider Western grid. And Colorado Springs Utilities, since 2005, since we had the passage of this section of the Federal Power Act, we have been very aggressive in both the physical and cybersecurity space of our organization. Now, since we're a Forest Service utility, we don't just say, well, we're going to do this over here for electric and not do it for water, wastewater, or gas. We don't look at our security posture that way. We look at it as sort of a corporate responsibility, our security posture. So we undertook a sort of stem to stern security posture, and we have a very robust and active security program at Colorado Springs Utilities. When we were going through and sort of doing our audit, our audit of internally, like how are we looking from our security perspective, one thing that kept coming up again and again was our sort of perceived vulnerability under the public record statutes in Colorado, where Colorado law, up until this last spring, had some pretty vague ambiguities about what we could or could not consider as public information. The law as drafted as we were going into this last session in 2017 basically said our security plans, we have the right to deny requests for information requests for our security plans or our detailed security procedures. Hey, we get that, and we were fine with that. We said, yeah, we shouldn't have to go out there and disclose how we're going to go about protecting our systems. But what about the nature of our systems? What about the schematics of our systems? What about sort of where we're storing our, our sensitive, switchgear, about how our substations are operating? That's the kind of information that, if in the wrong hands, could lead to some serious detrimental effects, not only in our system, but into the entire Western grid. And we looked at that perceived threat and said, we need to get some clarity into Colorado's public records law. And what we looked to was, again, the Federal Power Act. Under the Federal Power Act, the FERC has the ability to sort of classify information as critical electric infrastructure. And those are sort of physical and cyber assets of systems that touch the bulk electric grid. And FERC can go in and make the determination that these systems over here are critical. They're critical to the reliability and safety and security of the bulk electric system. And when FERC makes that determination, those records now are no longer subject to FOIA. And we thought that was a pretty good protection to have, because information we share with FERC when we're sharing sort of detailed diagrams of not only our physical footprint, but also our security footprint, we want to be sure that that information isn't accessed through a FOIA request. And we were really pleased with that outcome, that Congress sort of led the way on that fight to give FERC that authority to deny those requests and to go in and classify critical electric infrastructure as free from FOIA. That's all well and good, and we have sort of this standing exemption within CORA that says, well, if you are free from FOIA, to sort of paraphrase, or if you have a federal exemption, then that exemption applies in state law as well. And that was all in good for those pieces of our critical electric infrastructure that FERC had determined was critical through information sharing with FERC. Not all of our information we shared with FERC would have risen to that occasion. And frankly, none of our water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, or gas infrastructure, frankly, would have met that test. So we went and sat down with some of our industry partners, starting with the American Public Power Association, and they have a phenomenal primer on physical and cybersecurity and a very exhaustive checklist on what it means to be a secure electric utility. And I'll read the question, sort of what really motivated our thinking on here. It says, based on public information, can the public identify critical parts, equipment, storage areas, and physical security features? When we sat down and looked at our obligations under CORA up until this past spring, our answer to that question was, yeah, the public can, or at least it's ambiguous. So for us, this entire effort in going through and amending Senate Bill 40 to include critical infrastructure under the may deny section of CORA was really driven sort of by that security posture, to sort of take the protections we enjoyed as an electric utility and be able to apply them under state law system-wide. And again, one of the things we want to be really clear on, and we were really clear with our policymakers when we were making this argument, when we were having this conversation, we're talking about critical infrastructure. Nothing in here addresses, public records on expenditures. Nothing in here, and frankly, the law is quite explicit, really talks about, general physical location. You can go on Google Earth and find out where this stuff is. That's not what we were concerned with. What we were concerned with is the information that would be contrary to the public interest if it were in the public domain. If it fell into the wrong hands, could provide sort of a security threat to our system. And that's really what motivated us in our conversations. And frankly, we can talk a little bit more about maybe the back and forth of how we got to where we ended up when Doug arrives. But that's what sort of broached our participation in this and why we ended up here today. So that's my little sales pitch to you all this morning. I appreciate your attention and more than happy to sort of answer any questions about our system and maybe our involvement on this issue, if anybody has any. All right, well, I'll turn things over.
Okay. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for everyone for being here. I know there's a lot of sessions going on this morning, and if it's okay with everybody, I'm just going to sit for this presentation. I've got some slides to go through. And just wanted to talk about, Dan talked a little bit about the electrical side of things and how that connects with water. I'm just going to describe our dam safety experience. I've been working in the world of critical water information for at least the last 4 years. I was part of represented Colorado Dam Safety on a workshop in 2014 that we'll talk a little bit about. But I also wanted to talk today about how our experience, how that fits with Senate Bill 40, and how that all looks from our perspective. So, as I said, Colorado Dam Safety, we have a policy that went into effect in 2005 that talks about our dam safety records. It says that certain data that could result in substantial injury to the public interest are protected from public disclosure. Some of this is related to CORA. It's tied pretty closely to CORA, and it also kind of stemmed from the 9/11 disaster, tragedy. This is when this stuff came into effect. So the information that says that we don't have to disclose to the public includes our emergency action planning, information on the physical details of dams, threat and vulnerability assessments, failure modes and consequences analysis, how dams can fail, any construction details, photographs, hydrology, stage discharge relationships, and any records that, if their disclosure would not be in the interest of public safety. So a pretty big list. You know, since I've been chief of dam safety, we get probably 60 to 100 requests for information, for dam information on an annual basis. Just off the top, this is kind of the list of people that we get those requests from, and the numbers you see there are just an off the top of my head sort of order of magnitude estimate. There's nothing very scientific about that. But in general terms, most of our requests come from engineers. We get a little from lawyers, doing water law cases, real estate agents, doing property transactions of one sort or another. Dam owners, insurance companies come to us for information. We get requests from the media periodically, mostly when there's something going on like in Oroville or something along those lines that generates public interest. And then we do get a really small amount of our requests come from the general public when they hear something about dams in their area. And like I said, we have a process to handle all those requests. This is just an example from February of this year. This was related to a dam up on the Cache la Poudre. We got it, came in from the media outlet, the Coloradan, up in Fort Collins. And they had heard a little bit about a dam that the spillway activated the previous year, caused some damage, and they wanted to investigate that and see what was going on. So we got the request, and since this is a relatively unusual request for us, we always call the people first to make sure we understand what the kind of information they're asking for. We want to make sure that we're not wasting anybody's time if they're asking a question that we can't answer or something like that. In this case, they did reference CORA. They said pursuant to CORA in the letter there. So that's sort of just, for us, that's not a huge deal. It just kind of sets a timeliness factor. And we try to address these information requests in a timely way anyway, so it's not super unusual. And so we were able to provide this information. It came in on the 19th. We gave our approval on the 20th. And we also let the dam owners know. Whenever we're giving out information in this way, we let the dam owners know who asked for what information. They have a file record of it. They can contact the people directly. We have a record in our files then of who's looking at what. In most cases, like I said, 75% of these come from engineers, and so those we typically don't have much discussion on. But if there's something out of the ordinary, we reach out to the people to do that. We also deny requests for public information, not as often as we approve them. But in this case, we got a request from the general public from a well-informed citizen, let's say, in Boulder area, interested in Gross Reservoir. In Denver Water, they're a lot like Colorado Springs Utilities. They're pretty tight with their security. They've got some pretty tight security arrangements there, and we respect those. So we try not to do anything that goes against what the dam owner's wishes are. And this gentleman had already submitted a request to Denver Water, and they said they referenced CORA and said related to security and safety sensitive information. They denied him, but he sent a request to us. Dad said no, and so he's looking to Mom to say yes, kind of thing, and we get that played off there. So we called him and said, what do you really want this for? And it turns out he disagreed with some development that Boulder was doing, and he was trying to show the inundation of Gross Reservoir, would negatively impact the development. And so we try not to take sides in cases like that. And this one, we scratched our head a little bit about how to handle this properly, so we got the Attorney General involved just to make sure we didn't do anything against CORA or against anything there. And they responded to us, gave us some advice, and they looked at another part of CORA and referenced another statute. And it turns out we had to defer to the owners. They sort of have first right of refusal. So if the owner says no, then we have to defer back to them. We wrote a letter and said we have to refer you back to the dam owner in that case. We're not going to give you that information. And this sort of falls into, Denver Water puts this safety and security sensitive info on all their EAPs and inundation maps, and so that triggers it. That's what triggers it back to those provisions in CORA. Now, as I said, we've been interested in critical infrastructure. This is a report that was put out by a group that started with the National Dam Safety Review Board, which is a group of federal, state, dam safety interests, dam owners. And they started in 2013 trying to figure out what to do about critical infrastructure information for dams. They wanted to try to establish some guidelines. And we got involved with that. Colorado Dam Safety was interested, and so we helped them develop a workshop in Denver for that. They wanted to have 3 workshops across the country. And we got people in the Denver and Colorado areas involved in this, and we had a one-day workshop where we had federal agencies from the Corps, the Bureau, FEMA, FERC, our state dam safety, California Dam Safety was involved, Colorado Dam Safety, dam owners, Denver Water, Springs Utilities were there, state OEM, Denver and County OEM, Denver and Fort Collins floodplain managers, the Department of Public Safety. So we had a really good group, had a great one-day session on the pros and cons of giving out critical information. At the end of the day, we didn't have any consensus. We had some pretty strong opinions from both sides of the aisle, and the differences kind of pertained around these 2 statements that were put together. Basically, here's the pro, here's the con. So now I'll just read these quickly so you can see, both sides here. So a wide spectrum of stakeholders needs access to certain dam safety and emergency preparedness information in order to make informed decisions and prepare for potential emergencies. We'll talk more about that. And then conversely, like Dan has pointed out, certain technical information could be useful to potential adversaries interested in causing damage or disruption to a facility or exploiting dams as weapons of mass destruction by facilitating targeted attack planning efforts. So those are the 2 sides of the issue, and we had a robust discussion about that. This document, which I've got a few copies of this up here if folks want to see it after. Happy to share that within certain limitations. This document contains, it's a 38-page document with 26 pages of tables about the kinds of information that might be available for dams and what to do with each of them. So we've got the description of the document, benefits of dissemination and benefits of withholding, and then we've also got some different ways to disclose that. So we've got unrestricted, limited, controlled, and totally restricted. So there's different ways you can disclose information as well, and you might try to do that. One thing that I found interesting about the document is that every page at the top and bottom has this statement for official use only. So I think that would fall under one of those limited dissemination or controlled dissemination, or that's what they're trying to do anyway. So that's our experience with critical infrastructure and some of those workshops. I also wanted to share some parallels that I found in other industries that have to do with hazardous chemicals in this case. So in 1986, there was a federal act, the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. And this was legislation as the result of a tragic chemical accident in India. Union Carbide had a uncontrolled release of chemicals into a densely populated area in India, caused lots of deaths. We'll talk about that in a second. But so the EPA came out with it. They didn't want that similar thing to happen in the U.S., so they came out with their EPICRA language, which basically said that the communities around these chemical plants have the right to know what they're being exposed to. So community right to know provisions will help increase the public's knowledge and access to information on hazardous chemicals. And this created a state commission, the Colorado Emergency Planning Commission, and it also dictated that counties have to have local emergency planning commissions to handle these. They have to generate an inventory of all these toxic chemicals. They make that inventory public, and then they make the entities that have those report on if they have hazardous releases or extremely hazardous materials releases. So, what does this mean? And this is kind of the reaction that I've gotten. People, they don't quite understand what the connection I'm trying to make here. It's like oil and water, literally. How does this connect to the water world? We're talking about hazardous chemicals. That's different than water. So I've been trying to use these parallels to our advantage. We already have this system that lets people know about hazardous chemicals. How do we use that for the critical infrastructure of dams and the risk of dams? And so the common link really is the consequences. That's what, hazardous chemical release has consequences, dam failures have consequences. So that's where the connection is. So this is the Bhopal tragedy, which precipitated the EPICRA legislation. Tragic, it's unfathomable, 20,000 people were killed in a densely populated area next to this chemical plant. We have a similar analogy in the dam safety world. In 1889, South Fork Dam in Johnstown, Pennsylvania failed suddenly, catastrophically, and it killed 2,209 people and wiped out the town of Johnstown completely. So until 9/11, this was the largest mass casualty incident in the United States. So for over 100 years, a dam failure had the distinction of being the largest mass casualty event in the country. So how does this relate to Senate Bill 40? When I first heard about Senate Bill 40 come out, there was some concern that it would lock down all dam safety information, even the things that might be useful for public education and community right to know about, if people are living below dams. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert on this, I haven't memorized it, but I wanted to look at it in the light of, how does it tie our hands to getting better public education around dams? So I started looking at it in that light. And of course, the similarity here, it talks about maintaining information from governmental bodies. We've talked about that. We've got lots of dam information. It talks about denials. There's lots of language in there similar to CORA about what information can't be shared. And this third-party proprietary information, that's the Denver water case. So we know how to deal with that. That's nothing new there. And it talks about approvals. This is kind of where I saw that that made me optimistic that this doesn't do anything that's going to impair my plans for public education in the area of dam safety. And like all good legislation, it leaves you enough wiggle room to be able to use it for different purposes. So this, I took away that said the custodian of the information may deny. It doesn't explicitly say that we shall deny information. And then, so this is the paragraph that talks about the kind of information, and as Dan has said, I think this emphasizes the cybersecurity threat, and that's really good. We totally agree with all this information about the engineering, vulnerability. We don't want the bad guys to see that information. My interest is in this public response plans and that whole community right to know kind of thinking. So, what I want to do is, is exploit that so we can let folks know the risks that they have. And we've started doing that in Colorado Dam Safety to a degree. We've had some success with that. The Colorado Information Marketplace has a lot of dam information on it now, including the date of the last dam inspection and the condition assessment that we gave it. Is it satisfactory, conditionally satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and the safe storage level. So we're already letting people know or have access to that information. We don't let them see the files themselves, but they know the condition of dams that they might be living below. And we were pleased and optimistic that Senate Bill 40 doesn't lock our hands with that either. So I want to kind of finish talking about the risk management world. That's what we do. We manage the risk of the bad thing happening, the dam failure, and the consequences. So that's what risk is, right? It's the probability of that bad thing happening times the consequences if it does. We think from our risk management side of the house, we think we can work on both of those things at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive, and that's where we see this public information being useful for that. If we don't use the sledgehammer approach of the Senate Bill 40 locks down all information, if we are more strategic about what's there, that gives us the opportunity to work on both sides of both factors of this equation at the same time. We can withhold information from the bad guys about the physical structures, the vulnerabilities. At the same time, the dam owners are hardening those facilities and making sure that those vulnerabilities are protected, in the worst case scenario that somebody finds them. And I think we can, strategically say, we'll let a little of this information out because it has a bigger benefit to educate the public than the bad guys can do with it. The bad guys can't make the dam fail by knowing where the water's going to go if it fails. So So we think if we're selective and strategic about how we use this critical information, we can do the best that we can for our situation. And, you know, it used to be, the old thinking was, you know, if we let people know that they're in the dam failure inundation zone, we're going to scare them. There's going to be public hysteria. They won't know what to do. But I think that's changing. I think, you know, first of all, we got to get them interested because they're kind of ambivalent. But I've got a couple examples of where in society we're getting more accustomed to seeing, you know, risk. This is CDOT's execution of their risk education program, right? They have highway signs that talk about the number of deaths on the highway. I've drove up 285 a lot, and every month that number would go from 315 to 415 to 500. So they're talking about the risk of driving recklessly and that you could die doing that. So folks are used to seeing that. Another really interesting program that I've seen, we moved to Denver recently and went down to Union Station, and they have all these little cartoon guys around here, so we were wondering what that was. And this is a neat program from the City of Melbourne Metro District in Australia. Has anybody heard of the Dumb Ways to Die campaign? Have you heard the Dumb Ways to Die song? Dumb ways to die, so many dumb ways to die. And it has all these guys like killing themselves by jumping into trains, you know, doing all this other stuff. You go online and Google it. It's a 3-minute song. It's pretty cute, but it's basically, you know, it's an education program about the risks around trains, and it's actively talking about the risk of death if you know, do something dumb around a train. In Denver, the Melbourne Metro, they've reported that through this educational campaign, which has won worldwide awards for education and you know, advertising, that kind of stuff, those kind of awards, they say that they've gotten 10 to 20% reduction in near-miss accidents because of this education campaign. So folks can be educated to the risks, and we, you know, I think it's harder to scare them now if we talk about the risk of dam failure and the possibility that you might, you know, get swept away in a flood and die if a dam fails. So I think we just have to talk about this head on, and you know, I'll close with just point out a little bit about what we know about the dam failure risk in Colorado currently. So Colorado Dam Safety has been collecting inundation mapping shape files for a couple years now. We've got about 320 of the 700 high and significant hazard dams. We've got shape files for those. We've got them in a geodatabase, and we've developed a program to calculate, among other things, population at risk from the census information that comes. We combine those together in some algorithms, and we can generate population at risk, which is just an estimate of the population that are exposed to the flooding that happens from dam failures. So of those 320 dams, we've cumulatively now got a population at risk of about 822,000 people in the state of Colorado. And we can imagine, you know, if you have enlargements and new dams, you know, the glades, the chimney hollows, the gross reservoirs, you know, that number is going to increase. And right now, this is our top 10 list. Due to security information, I'm not providing the name of the dams. But we've got, you know, a dam that has 225,000 people living below it. And then the top 10 goes down to an order of magnitude to 24,000. So, you know, we really think that this information, you know, if we selectively and strategically use the security information, we're not prohibited from using this for the public good, for publication processes that would let people know their risk. I was happy to see that. I'm optimistic that I'll still be able to continue the programs that I want to do in Colorado with public education around dams. And as if on cue, literally, I was working on this presentation over the weekend, and in the email comes this email from a friend of mine who's on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. And we're Colorado, we're working on a dam near here, Willow Creek Dam, Steamboat Lake. It's under construction. We developed an emergency action plan for construction because there's some risk associated with the construction, working on a dam with a full reservoir. And you know, we didn't release that to the public. We exercised it over the weekend, actually, on Saturday before I got this. But turns out the public is ahead of us on this. This is a Facebook post that says, rumor has it there is a slight risk of catastrophic failure of Steamboat Lake while it's under reconstruction. although the odds aren't very high, I think everybody should know how things would look should the worst happen and plan accordingly. So I don't know who posted this, who he is, or what it is, but I'd like to meet him and thank him and sort of say I'm jealous that we didn't put this information out before the public did to help his community prepare for the unlikely event of a dam failure. I think there's opportunity for that, and I don't think anything in Senate Bill 40 precludes us from doing that. So, so that was good for me to review that in the context of what we're doing in Colorado Dam Safety. So,
I would just like to interject on that point in particular, that not only does nothing in Senate Bill 40 preclude that, you have a test that exists in statute under CORA that we just added this language to, and that's the test of public interest. And specifically, the way maybe to appropriately read this is as follows: the custodian may deny the right of inspection of the following records, and we would include in that case the critical infrastructure, the physical and cyber assets, emergency response plans, etc., on the ground that disclosure to the applicant would be contrary to the public interest. That's the test custodians are operating under. Would this request, would this disclosure be contrary to the public interest? And I think your program and everything that you've described is very much within the realm of being for the public interest. So it seems to me we have some rather nice harmony with what already existed in the statute and sort of the additional types of records that we added under Senate Bill 40.
I think there's different interpretation of that. Denver Water is very, they will not provide their inundation mapping to the public. And we have to respect their proprietary information. We do that, but the other, not all dam owners are that tight with their infrastructure, so that gives us plenty of room to develop education with other dams that aren't Denver Waters, and maybe we can we can show Denver Water the way in that area in the future. So. Yeah, please do.
I'm just going to stand. Okay, so what we want to think a little bit about, and Bill did a great job of talking about Senate Bill 40 and what did change, but we hadn't really spent, in the post 9/11 world, we did not spend a lot of time thinking about what information that you have can you protect? Because the way the law was written before, and I'd always been told that, oh no, every water provider can maintain that, no problem, and keep it confidential. And I never really looked at the statute until this bill came up. And the intention of the bill was to provide information. If you had it in electronic form, you needed to provide it in electronic form. It was on a whole different issue. But so the problem is, if you've got, think about all the different packages, software packages that are used in dam design and distribution network design, pump stations, et cetera. If you have that file in an electronic format, then the way the law was going to be written, you were going to have to provide that in the same electronic format. You wouldn't have to buy the software and give it to them, but you had to provide it in that same electronic format. So some of the difference in historically was that, okay, you just if you have in a paper record, you just give them a paper record. It's pretty easy to redact stuff out of a paper record. But when you've got something in electronic format, now you've got to be, all of a sudden you have to be an expert in all the software and making sure that that you think something that you deleted from a file is actually deleted. So we spent a lot of time on Senate Bill 40 talking about something called metadata, and it's all the data about the electronic file that you have, and how you keep that information confidential, and how you can be certain that you have kept it confidential. That's a whole different world. So I do think that we're heading towards a new era, but and the way it was in the past was a custodian of a record could say, well, that's not in the public's interest. If anyone challenged that, then it's the custodian's burden of proof to show that that's not in the public's interest to release that record. All that's got to be done, and a court's process has got to be done through the burden of proof is on the custodian of the record. So when you think about a distribution system, and Jerry, and consultants, if you're working on a distribution map and doing system pressure modeling, how many different people have access to the records that you have? And that gets to be a bit of a challenge, not only about if you have a record that is about your own system, but who else has that same record, and where all does that lie? I mean, we got a variety of consultants that have worked on that. If you've got to if you want to go dig someplace, you've got to they've got to have some idea where the flipping pipe is and how what its diameter.
We insist that you know where the pipe is if you're digging.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that challenge, and I think it's going to be an ongoing thing as we continue to explore. The public feels like they have a right to know. You look at, and moving over to the dam safety issue, Bill and I got into some discussion right after, as the whole Oroville situation was happening, and I was asking him, so, are dam safety reports a public record? Can anybody go out and start looking at the piezometer data or the spillway design criteria? How far can they go? How far is that, a public record? And then should the dam fail, what about the inundation mapping below that? My first job, I worked for a small company called Rocky Mountain Consultants, and that was my job, was to blow up dams and electronically. We ran HEC 1 and then HEC 2 modeling to look at the inundation mapping below there.
Best job ever.
Thank you. Yeah, it was it was interesting. So, Chris?
I did cover the Pueblo Dam in 1997 through 99 when there was dam safety on it. And there's another, when you were talking about consequences and the probability of bad things, that kind of resonated with me, because the Bureau of Reclamation during that period made a lot of effort to inform people about consequences. They were never good at sharing information, but I had a friend who was an engineer who took me to the library and showed me where the schematic of the dam as built was actually located. I guess as a reporter, I learned there was more than one way to get information, and doesn't it make sense to kind of try to manage what information they're getting rather than just let them explore like that?
That would be our position, but I'd turn over to Bill.
Yeah. No, we agree that, the information that we have access to, we are pretty careful about what we let out. So we totally agree with that. The point, you make a great point, Chris, that we don't want to fool ourselves into thinking that we have this great security system, because there are multiple ways to get information. Lots of people touch it, and you can't, just because you put for official use only on a document doesn't necessarily mean, people are going to respect that. So I think, and that's part of my point too, is as the owners of those facilities, where those vulnerabilities are, where the weak points are. So, and most of our dam owners know that, and they work to protect those areas. So you have to do both. You've got to protect the structure itself and the information.
Yeah, one of the other things that I noticed too is that if somebody really, really wants to protect information, as a reporter, I really, really wanted it.
Right.
So it's something that I'm in the position where I get calls from reporters, and I try to manage the interviews more than restrict what they can see. So.
Well, I think you highlighted the tension, right? I mean, this is really the tension between the public's right to know and anything that's owned by the public. There is a certain degree of information the public is entitled to. It's their facilities. I mean, Colorado Springs Utilities, we're a community-owned utility, and we take that very seriously. That the assets are not some corporate assets. They're the community's assets. They're our assets. However, we have an obligation as the owners and operators of that asset as a utility to make sure that those assets are operating as intended and safe from threat of attack. And lest anyone, think, oh, you guys are being paranoid, utility infrastructure is target number one for foreign state actors, right? We know that. We go to the briefings. We've been told time and time again from the FBI, DHS, DOD, you guys are in the crosshairs. What are you doing to protect your systems? And we just want everybody to be well aware of that fact, that we're not sitting here saying, the sky is falling, just to try and make changes to the law to be more persnickety with what we do and do not release. We were very targeted in this, and maybe to hit a little bit on what Doug said, the electronic version of this, we had no objection to it, Colorado Springs Utilities. We thought, hey, look, again, public right to know, public right to know. We just wanted to make sure that the types of records that we most jealously wanted to guard were clearly spelled out in there, and we were very satisfied with the end result. And I want to use this opportunity to really do a plug for Colorado Water Congress. We could not have accomplished this change on our own. And this was a significant change for our organization, something that we viewed as very beneficial. So if you're in the room and you're a Water Congress member, this is one of the value-added things of your membership. Doug identified this issue and saw the opportunity and alerted the State Affairs Committee, and that's where I was like, hey, we've been talking about this for years. Thanks for identifying the opportunity, Doug. And I've got to give Doug and Diana and Emily, your team, a lot of credit. We couldn't be here sitting in this room today if it weren't for the hard work of the Water Congress. And to me, it's our membership's worth its weight in gold. Every ounce of gold we pay you every year, it's worth every nickel.
Thank you for that, Dan. So and Senate Bill 40, our amendment to that got hooked on the last train out of town. This was, there was a lot of resistance to doing this amendment from the bill sponsors, as Emily will attest to. We were able to get it on the dreaded third reading amendment in the second house. So this was literally happened on the last day of the session. After 50 some odd different versions of this bill went through. Yeah, so just on this issue, we'd gone through like 19 different amendments. So there was a lot of controversy with this. They kept saying, just bring a bill back next year and we'll talk to you about it. But getting this done was just barely got under the wire.
Well, and to be fair, the controversy wasn't over our ask. The controversy was over everything else that was attached in this bill, and we were just seen as, we've got enough on our plate, guys, without you coming to the table. That's really, if I could distill it to its essence, that's what the argument that was thrown back at us was. Could you guys just come back next year? Nobody objects to this. And it really was a question of, well, why would you not want us to be able to protect critical infrastructure? It doesn't make any sense. And all the policymakers, and I say that unequivocally, agreed with, yeah, you're right. But this particular vehicle is pretty jam-packed. Could you wait? And Doug was the one that said, no, if we don't do this now, we'll never get another opportunity. And I think you're exactly right. I really appreciate your leadership on this.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. And Representative Arndt, too, I mean, the work that we'd been doing with our legislatures, that really played out. They were very strong from the well, which is the area there where the legislators speak from in the House. And that was extremely helpful. And the other thing that I think really worked well on this one was that we had a really good working relationship with Colorado Ethics Watch and the Colorado Press Association, both of which were pushing for this more open information. But I think without their help, this wouldn't have gotten done either. But we were able to, in working with the Ethics Watch and with the Press Association that wanted as much data released as possible, that made a huge difference. And I came away from there really feeling very positive about working with both of them. So as Dan was enormously helpful in this whole thing about tying the electrical infrastructure, showing the parallels, all that was a big deal. So good steps in the right direction. Yeah. But this is an ethics issue as well, and it's something that I think you're going to continue to hear more about as the public continues to have scrutiny on the expenditure of public dollars. Okay, Steve.
I could ask a lot of questions, but I'll throw you a softball maybe. In addition to things like transparency, there's arguments for open data from an efficiency standpoint, even sharing between different government agencies or your contractors, that there's a certain level of data that if it's out there, they can just get their work done better and you don't have to jump through hoops. And then there's the quality control aspect of it, that if the data are out there, different eyes are looking at it and maybe picking up on things that were overlooked. So could you comment on those two areas and maybe what you've seen so far and going forward? Do you see benefits in publishing data sets in those areas that you would see some benefits?
Yes, I think to the efficiency part of the question, that's what we put a lot of our dam information up on the Colorado Information Marketplace site, with the idea that would, it would make things more efficient on our end. We wouldn't have to address the comments. People could just go look for that, or we wouldn't have to address information requests. The engineers, the people that wanted to look at that could go look for themselves. And that has proved to be the case. Right after the Oroville incident, the hits on that site spiked, went over, more than 100 per day for a week or so. And if we had to process those internally, it would have been really tough for our staff. So that, I think people got the information they needed, and we didn't have to go out of our normal day-to-day business to do that. And then the quality control part, that when we first started putting that information up there, we hoped we would get more help with that. But that hasn't really panned out as much as we'd hoped. We haven't had as much scrutiny of the data that I was sort of thinking that we would, because we've got a pretty good database, but we know it's not perfect. And so I was a little surprised it hasn't been used for that. We haven't seen people inquiring and say, this data doesn't look right, and allowing us to fix it. And that's just, I'm not sure how we address that, but it gives us, it's helped us, it gives us a nice friendly environment for us to go look at the data. And as we do different projects, we can correct things ourselves, which we have done. So internally, it's helped us do quality control, but it hasn't come from the outside.
I would just say from our perspective, it depends on the data. And we're sort of in the throes of a conversation right now internally at Colorado Springs Utilities as to what kind of information do we make readily available to contractors and our friends in the development community, because, again, we're community owned. We're in the business of wanting to see our community grow and develop. We're in the business of wanting to serve our community owners. So we realize this tension that you're talking about, but also if in conflict, and I'll maybe leave it at this, if there is a conflict between securing our system and making it easier to do business, we're always going to err on the side of securing our system, hands down every time. The consequences are too severe to screw it up.